Hi there, is that Sharon?
Hi, it is.
Sharon, hi, my name's Rob. I've been advised by a colleague to contact you to find out about these things called trips. I wonder if you could tell me something about them, please.
Oh, hi, Rob. Yeah, great to hear from you. More than happy to talk to you about the trips. I think what's probably worth, first of all, is just explaining to you actually what trip means. So, trips are our T-level resource improvement projects. So that's what it actually stands for. It's probably worth saying, Rob, you might have some colleagues who were involved in trips last year. Now, last year, they were actually T-level regional improvement projects. So we have moved the focus a little bit of them this year, still very much around improving practice in the delivery of T-levels, but we've moved that focus to resource. So we really are looking for some outputs this year that we'll be able to share actually across the sector. But lots of things have stayed the same. So they are action research projects and they are collaborative. We do have some differences this year in terms of how we've split them, and I can talk about that in terms of small and large trips, but that's really about size and scale of project. With all of our trips, what's also really great is that you get a named advisor, somebody who can actually support you with them. But they really, in a nutshell, are collaborative projects to improve T-level delivery. They're actually funded and commissioned through the Association of Colleges that I work for, and that's on behalf of the Education and Training Foundation, because they're part of an overall T-level professional development offer. So in a nutshell, if you like, that's what they are. Does that sound something that you might be interested in?
Yeah, it sounds interesting, but I'm still not sure why my organisation would get involved.
Um, okay, I'll perhaps try to elaborate a little bit further. I mean, I think, they're a really great opportunity for practitioners, for managers, for specialist provider staff and employers to really get together and think about what you might want to develop and create to support T-level delivery, and how you might test that, how you might evaluate it. So it really does provide an opportunity, I think, for you and your staff, for some professional development and a chance to work with others. And that might be other providers, but that could also be other, could be employers, and could be a whole host of organisations. I mean, ultimately, what we want to do with the trips and the outputs that we get from them is to make sure then, in terms of outcomes for learners, that we end up with T-level students who can really develop the knowledge, skills and behaviours that are a requirement, obviously, of the T-level. So if you're planning to deliver T-levels, they really are something that I think would be of benefit to you.
Yeah, it certainly sounds interesting. I think that it's the sort of thing that we might be interested in, but you mentioned something about small and large trips. Can you tell me something about those, please?
Yeah, so this year, as I say, we've got two types of trips, which we didn't have last year. And I think, the small trips are perhaps something that people may not be quite as familiar with as the large ones. So there are some similarities, small and large trips, but there's also some differences. With both, we are still looking for some high quality outputs. And obviously, as I mentioned, we're looking for things that we're then going to be able to share across the sector. So clearly we do want some transferability within those outputs. But the difference, I suppose, between the small and the large is in terms of volume of outputs, but I think particularly in the amount of activity that goes on. That's what really differentiates the small and the large trips. They're both still action research. They both still have AOC advisors to provide support and stretch and challenge. They're both still collaborative in nature. The amount of partners is different in each, again, because that's a reflection of the amount of activity. And because of that difference in terms of the amount of activity, for the small trips, we're really looking at that taking place over a number of weeks, okay? Whereas the large ones are going to be over a number of months, okay? And the funding then reflects, obviously, that amount of activity. So the small ones, we are saying short, very focused activity, minimum of 2 partners there, one of which has obviously got to be a 2020 or 2021 provider. And with the large ones then, we move on to thinking much more about activity that's going to be over a period of months. But we are still looking, wherever possible, for target completion at the end of July. And that will be true of the small ones as well. But many of the small ones might finish before July because we're talking about a number of weeks. Again, with the large ones, because of the amount of activity and what we want to see there, we're talking about more partners. So in this instance, we've got whoever's the lead, yeah, which again needs to be a 2020 or 21 provider. But then we've got 3 other organisations. And clearly, again, the funding is a reflection of that amount of activity. So for the large ones, that does go right up to, 45,000. But, there's no requirement that every trip has to be that much. It's obviously dependent on what you're actually going to be doing. Does that make some sense, Rob, about the sort of difference really between the two?
Yeah, thanks, Jan. That's really helpful. And we are a 2021 provider, and we've got really good links with other providers and employers and other people interested. So I think it's useful for us to know that those 2 sizes are there. I seem to remember somewhere in the back of my mind this thing about trips that I think that we might have been involved perhaps about a year ago on something.
Okay. Yeah.
I just wondered if you've got any suggestions that might help us as we think through what we might focus on.
Yeah, okay. I mean, we have identified some themes, but I think, we're keen to say that we are flexible, but you do need to very clearly focus on T-levels, and we do have that need for some resources that we can share across the sector. So it might be that you and your colleagues, perhaps, as you say, have a really good relationship with some local employers, and so you wanted to work with them to develop some resources on a particular T-level topic that that some of your staff might struggle with. And so those resources would obviously be something that would be really fantastic for you and your colleagues to use, but then they'd also be something that other T-level providers would find really useful as well when they were delivering that topic. And as I say, if you're doing a small one, it might be that you're focusing on a very, very specific bit of an occupational specialism that some of your staff are going to struggle with. But if you were doing a large trip, then that might be a much bigger set of resources. And again, perhaps you're covering much more of an occupational specialism. But it doesn't just have to be those. Obviously, you'll see some bits and pieces on there about you might be looking at some formative assessment ideas and strategies. You might well be looking at some IAG resources as well that you might want to be developing. So, we're trying to keep it as flexible as we can, but clearly just T-level and we want those resources to be able to share. Does that sound something like you might be interested in, Rob?
Yeah, that's really helpful, Sharon. Thanks, because I'm already starting to think of some ideas of where we are with our planning for T-levels and some of these bits that could really help us move things forward. Just between you and me, what's the application process like?
Well, obviously it is public funded money, Rob, so we do have to have a process, and that does need to be quite stringent, but we have tried to keep the actual bits of paper, etc., that you need to fill in as a minimum. So we do have a form. You know, there's always going to be a form, and you're filling in that form whether you're applying for a small trip or whether you're applying for a large trip. What happens to the form once you send it in is slightly different between those two. So for the small trips, that goes through an AOC with ATF support commissioning process. For the larger ones, because they're obviously quite a large amount of money involved, that does have to go to an ETF steering group. So that's really the difference in terms of where it goes once it's completed. But the form itself, there's a little bit of a snapshot of it here on the slide for you. And so we have a number of sections, and it's really an opportunity for you to tell us what you've identified as the problem or the challenge that you want to solve. So what you're going to do, but also why you're going to do it, and then really how you're going to do it. So that's what we're asking throughout the form. So these are a couple of the first boxes that you'll be asked to fill in. And you'll see with this, we have given you a couple of bullet points really to try and guide what we're looking for within that box. And that's obviously, if it's a large trip, that's what the steering group are going to be look at in terms of scoring applications. So it's really quite important that you do look at those bullet points and then base your response against those bullet points. And really make sure that when you're filling in the boxes, you are really talking about things that are specific to your project. And, you know, we're very keen to know, in terms of the resources that you're going to be producing, how you're going to test and evaluate those to make sure that they are something that's going to be high quality, and also something that is going to be transferable to the rest of the sector. It's probably worth mentioning as well, Rob, that obviously the beginning of the form, as well as you telling us obviously who you are, we do ask about your project partners, because that is one of the first things that we do need to check, that you have met our requirements in terms of project partners. So you do need to know before you send anything into us who you're going to be working with. We do also ask at the end of the form what you're going to be spending the money on. And to be fair, what we're really expecting, the vast majority of any of the funding, whether it's 5k or, you know, whether it's right up to 45k, the vast majority of that funding should be spent on costs. So, you know, if you're sending people out, I use that in a liberal way, to actually meet with others, if you're getting those staff to spend time developing resources and obviously to test and evaluate them, that's the sort of thing that we're expecting the money to be spent on. There are some things that you're not allowed to use project funding for, and one of those is capital expenditure. You know, so we have to be very clear about that from the start. With the small trips, there's no management fees on those, because they are obviously short, sharp projects. There is, if you want to, you can use some of the funding on the large ones. You can take some management costs out of there, but again, it can only be to a maximum of 10% of the overall project cost. So that you do need to have a good think about that as well when you're actually filling in your application. Anything on there that doesn't make a lot of sense, Rob?
No, I think that's really clear. Thank you. It's great that it's transparent, and certainly looking at the sort of guidance in the application process, that's going to help us, because we had a T-level steering meeting last week where some of these issues we were discussing, and there are a few challenges that we face. So this is really timely that we're having this conversation at the minute.
Yeah, and the fact that you've discussed those in one of your group meetings is great, because as you can see from there, we want to know why have you come up with this challenge. It just hasn't come off the top of your head. So if it's something that's already been on the boil, so to speak, and you and some partners have already had a chat about it, then obviously that's great, because we wanted to know why you want to do it and what you've established is the actual issue. So that's great. It's probably worth saying, Rob, you can find, if you might have found them already, but the actual guidance, the form that I've just shown you, you can get all of those off the ETF website. So on the T-level page, if you click on the networks and trips bit, it will take you to here, and then you just need to make sure that you scroll down all the way to the bottom of the page so that you can get the actual forms that you need.
That's brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you. I know I'm going to need to sort of discuss this with my colleagues, that we're going to need to think this through a little bit. Mm-hmm. What are the sort of key facts that they're going to need to know?
Okay, this might help you, I suppose. So with the small ones, yeah, obviously we did start this back in September, but you have now got up until the 21st of May to put in an application. So we have left it, if you like, as an open window rather than some very fixed points. But obviously you need to be mindful that we are wanting everything finished by the 5th of July. So clearly, if stuff could start coming in January, etc., you would then have that time over those number of weeks to get finished what you need to finish. Yeah, and as we've said, for these small ones, it's between 1,000 and between 1,000 and 5,000. You might want to think, Rob, about the small trip could be something, if you can get it done quick enough, that could then help you establish what you want to do on a large trip. So that might be another way of thinking about them. Or it can be something completely different. It might just be one of your teams has identified a very specific bit of T-level knowledge and skills that they're a bit worried about, and they've got a local employer who could work with them to develop, a really good project-based learning assignment that you want to use. So, could be either way, really. So that's your small ones. And then similarly, for the large ones, we have again got that open window. But obviously with these ones, because we're still looking at the 5th of July, it's going to be quite tricky if we don't get applications in January to get a large one finished. So we'd really encourage you to think quite early on. We do with these one, because of the fact that we have the steering group, we have some approval cycles, if you like. So, we're saying that the next cycle is really the 12th of February. So if you're thinking about a large one, I'd really encourage you to try and get something in by the 12th of February. And again, with these ones, remember, it's between 5 and 45. Doesn't have to be right up to the 45. One thing that you might have heard people mention, Rob, if you've had chats with anybody from last year, we had this lovely word called remission. And in last year's trips, there was an amount of money for remission. We don't have that this year. it was very difficult to manage, and people did struggle a lot with it. So we've decided that, you know, it's best really in terms of other CPD that you'll be doing, that's a completely separate thing. So for this year, that amount of money, that 5 to 45, is for the project activity. We don't have anything in terms of remission that's included in this year's projects.
Thanks. That's really helpful. I think I've got a good understanding now of the size, the two different sizes of the trips, the application window, the amount that they are, and also your sort of themes are going to be helpful for us to move that forward. I know you would have heard this before, but we are really busy. And what we'd want to do is to make sure that if we make an application, that we haven't sort of gone off at a tangent.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can help us?
Again, I don't know. These are sort of short ones that might help. So again, as I've mentioned, think very much about creating, testing, developing, your resources for improving your T-level delivery. Obviously, if we're talking small, then we're talking minimum of 2 stakeholders. Obviously, one of them needs to be a wave 1 or wave 2. You've indicated that you're going to be a 2021 provider, so that's great. We will need eventually a project plan, and really we also will, you know, want you to think very much about how the quality assurance is built into that. As I've said, no management fees for small trips. The other thing you might just want to remember in terms of the costings, really, that we are, because it's obviously public funded money, we're only able to pay the costs for ESFA funded organisations. So in the main, obviously, that's going to be providers. Yeah. And so similarly, I suppose, with the large ones, this one you need to really think about now that the 4 stakeholders, one of which has obviously got to be the wave 1 or wave 2 provider. And with this one, you can do the 10% management costs, but, you know, make sure it is the 10% of what your total is for your actual costed project. So those are perhaps some of the bits that you might want to think about.
Brilliant. No, thank you. That's really clear. And it's certainly been really useful to have this conversation. We are quite busy, and I'm bound to forget some of these things. Is there any help that's available to me as we move forward?
Yeah, there certainly is, Robin. I'd really encourage you to make use of our email that's specifically set up to support the trips, because, you know, particularly I suppose with the large ones, what we don't really want to be doing is taking applications to the steering group that are then going to get knocked back. So we'd much prefer that you had a conversation with us first. So do use the email address and note down, and somebody, myself or one of the other relationship managers might be able to give you a call and talk you through any questions that you've got in terms of getting the application sorted.
Brilliant. That's really useful. Thank you, Sharon. I'll definitely come back to you if I've got any further questions, but thanks for your time. That's been really great.
That's great, Rob. Thanks. I really look forward to getting 1, if not more, applications from you.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.